Good afternoon and welcome to Across the Fence. I'm Jolie Whitney. The spirit of Halloween that we know today comes from folk tradition and religious roots. Colonists were quick to bring their old world notions of the porous border between the living and the dead to their new homes in the New World. Even older than these traditions of bonfires, costumes, and spectral visitors are the con artists, so-called psychics and charlatans. In Vermont, the greatest of these can be found in one family, the Eddys of Chittenden, and we're talking about the town, not the county. Mary and her brother William and Horatio were some of the most well-regarded spirit mediums in the U.S. in the late 19th century. Joining us today to conjure up some of that old magic is Jason Smiley. He's researched the family for over a decade, giving lectures and presentations on the Eddy family, their beliefs, and dubious practices. Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
We're happy to have you. And as I mentioned, Mary, William, and Horatio Eddy, but this is kind of a family affair. Can you tell me a little bit about how they maybe started pretty young?
Sure. Yeah, the Eddys got their start in about 1863 is when they kind of first appeared on the scene of the spiritualist movement. And they started out in Brooklyn, New York, actually. And the act that they were performing was what they called cabinet manifestations. And essentially what they would do is travel throughout the Northeast, and they would have a cabinet built and put up on a stage, and people would come and pay money to watch this performance. Now they would go into the cabinet, usually one or two of the three, Mary, William, or Horatio would go into the cabinet, they'd be tied up. And then instruments might be placed inside this cabinet, and then the doors would be closed, the lights would be dimmed, and no sooner would the doors be closed than the sounds of the music would come out of the box. Sometimes voices would be heard coming from within the box, and then they would open the doors back up, and the Eddys would still be tied up as they were before.
And how many people were doing it? Was it always those three?
Typically just those three. There were one or two of their other brothers and sisters. There were 11 children total, but sometimes the other children would perform, but they're not as much. It was typically those three were the kind of big three of the family.
Sure, yeah. And like you said, it was kind of a family event, so to speak, but yeah. It started with their father, is that right?
Yeah, the legend says that the father sold the children out to traveling showmen, and that he got most of the money, or their agents did. But the evidence actually shows that there's no evidence to support that the Eddys started touring and giving these exhibitions until after the father died.
So maybe he's getting a worse rap than is deserved,
exactly.
perhaps.
Yeah.
And the Eddys also conducted materializations as well as these kind of seances. What's that?
Yes, so that's where things get really interesting. So in the 1860s is when the Eddys were doing these cabinet manifestations. And in about 1872, the spirits tell the Eddys that, okay, you're not going to do these cabinet exhibitions anymore. Now you're going to have the seances or the circles at your house in Chittenden. And what they did was they had sort of an evolution of the spirit box, and what it was kind of a closet up on a stage. They had a whole room built called a circle room where people would come and watch them perform their exhibitions. Only this time what would happen is William would go into the cabinet, or this kind of closet, and no sooner would he go in, a curtain would be closed, and out would step physical manifestations of departed loved ones coming to see the audience members.
Sure, so this isn't William and maybe a wig and a shawl. This is...
Well, some people say it was William in disguise, and,
right,
and some people say maybe it was some of the other brothers and sisters who were, co-conspirators in all this, dressed in disguise. So that's the big debate.
And you said that the spirits told them. So is a lot of the information we have about this family from the family themselves?
It is, yeah. Much of the history that has been told about the Eddys came from them. But there's a decent amount of newspaper accounts and other historical records that back up some of what they say in terms of dates, but not a lot prior to 1863.
Sure, and you mentioned those newspaper accounts as well. So were these performances well attended? Were they pretty busy?
They were. In the 1860s, they were very popular, again, traveling throughout the U.S. And got lots of people attending those, made a name for themselves. They were in a lot of newspaper articles. And then later, by 1874, when they kind of hit their peak, doing the materialization seances in Chittenden, then they became very well known. People were traveling from all over the U.S., all over the world, to come visit them, and with the hopes of speaking to their departed loved ones or to debunk them.
Oh, absolutely, a little bit on both sides.
Right.
And you mentioned the house they had there. Is it still standing?
Yes and no. So
Okay.
it's a lot of people, you know, they say the house still stands there today, but that's not quite true. The original house, the Eddy homestead, the building was actually torn down in 1898, and a new building was put up in its place. So it's there is still a building there, and some of the Eddys still did live there after the building, the old one was torn down and a new one was put in. But all of the activity from the materialization seances was prior to when it was torn down.
Sure, maybe it's still spiritually
Absolutely,
there.
there's still some things that happen there. I've been there a few times.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah. It's actually a ski club now, a lodge, the High Life Ski Club, which is based out of New Jersey, but they use it as a lodge for ski trips up here. And I'm actually a member, even though I don't ski myself. I'm a member just to support the lodge, and I'm sort of the unofficial historian of the lodge.
Sure, yeah, it sounds like you're well qualified for that position. And of course, you mentioned this a little bit earlier. Wherever you find believers in something like this, you also find skeptics. So who was out there kind of trying to debunk the Eddy family?
So probably most well known was Colonel Henry Steele Olcott, who I wouldn't describe him as a skeptic as much as an open-minded investigator. But he went to investigate the Eddys and spent actually 3 months there in the fall of 1874. He actually visited there at least twice, possibly 3 times. But yeah, he's his second visit, he stayed there for 3 months and really investigated, took notes, and actually he wrote articles for the New York Daily Graphic, which appeared every Tuesday and Friday for a time during those 3 months. And then later, the following year, he put together a book which kind of compiled all of those articles plus more, detailing his account of what he saw there.
And he kind of went in his life from maybe a skeptic to more of a believer. What do you think changed?
Yeah, so he did walk away a believer, and I think that he just could not disprove what they were doing. There were certain things he thought they might have been tricking the public on, like some of the tricks that involve like tying of the hands and things and getting out of those knots. But the actual piece of materialization, that aspect of their performance, he couldn't debunk. I mean, he tried very hard to do so. And there were other people who came at the same time the colonel was here, a doctor from New York, George Beard. He came an absolute skeptic. Like before he even got to the farm, he felt that they were just dressing up in cheap costumes and they were doing everything themselves, acting as the spirits. And lots of other newspaper reporters from different newspapers from all over the country came to try to debunk them as well. But the Colonel Olcott's definitely the most well-known, and his book has the most material published about the Eddys.
And so I'm sure you've read it then, if you're...
Yes, many times.
I see.
Yep. And I've read the original newspaper articles, which sometimes there's some nuggets of info in those old articles that aren't in the book. So it's kind of fun to compare the two.
Sure. And we were talking about non-believers and kind of how they would try and prove it. They would even tie the Eddys down to try and prove that their skills were on that level. Is that right?
Yeah. So during the 1860s, when they did the cabinet manifestations, oftentimes they would get local townspeople to form a committee, they called it, and they try to get people who were really good at tying knots. So carpenters, people that were boats, captains of boats and things like that, and tie them up as best they could, people that were well respected and known in the town, and tie them in whatever knots they could so that people would feel more comfortable that it wasn't them somehow just getting out of the knots and playing the instruments inside. And then later, when they had the materialization seances in Chittenden at the home, they would still do similar things and have audience members come up and tie them to the chair or different things like that.
Sure, committee is a very bureaucratic name for a group of people who tie really good knots.
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly.
And later in life, the Eddys kind of showed their hand a little bit more and talked about how they pulled off some of their cabinet tricks, for instance. Tell me about that.
So they actually they exposed themselves actually early in their career. So they came on the scene again. It was about 1863 in Brooklyn, New York, and maybe 5 or 6 years later, something happened, and there was a little bit of a rift between William and Mary on one side and Horatio on the other. And William and Mary decided to expose how they were doing these cabinet manifestation tricks. And Horatio denied it. He said, well, whatever they're showing you is not how, it's done. The spirits are real and that type of thing. So they kind of had a rift. They each got their own agents and went their separate ways. But they came back together in 1872 when the spirits told them now the seances would be at the house. And at that point, they never really exposed themselves beyond that. It was just a very limited period of time where they, showed people how they supposedly did these tricks. Now, in 1875, there was an anonymous letter supposedly written by someone in the family that was sent to the New York Sun that laid out how they were doing the tricks at the home with the materialization. But there's not really a lot of evidence to back up if it was somebody within the family that exposed them or not, but things really fell apart after that.
Sure, so the cabinet tricks, what do we know about how they pulled them off?
So the cabinet tricks seemed to be a fairly common illusion that was done at the time, and later magicians, lots of different ones, but it was specifically Harry Houdini revealed how those types of things were done, and it was simply a matter of getting out of the ropes and playing the instruments or putting their face like with a mask in front of the doorway, that type of thing. So it seems to be just like a common illusion that was done at the time. And then the things that were happening at the house, some people say the family was involved, dressing in costume, and they had lots of costumes supposedly hidden throughout the house, and that's how they were, and a secret stairway coming up from the chimney, that type of thing.
And you say things kind of petered out for the Eddys after the New York Sun article came out, so what happened to them?
So, about 1875, there was, in addition to that letter that came out, the anonymous letter, there was a lot of infighting amongst the family, and it's not really clear what specifically they were fighting about, but, you can only speculate. And there's a lot of documentation that later there were some really severe things happened with the family. And in one example, in 1877, the brother Horatio and a neighbor, Stephen Baird, actually assaulted Mary and her husband, and she actually lost a baby as a result of that assault. And a lot of cases went to court with the family, infighting about properties and who owned property in that area. So things were never the same after that. But there is evidence that the family from time to time did get back together to continue to do performances in Moravia, New York, and in Lake Pleasant, Massachusetts. There's a spiritualist camp there that sometimes they would all be there. Sometimes they might be in separate tents, and still a little fighting, saying bad things about each other. But also there was, here in Burlington at Queen City Park, there's a spiritualist camp that sometimes they would speak at and perform their exhibitions at.
Wow, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Glad to be here. Thank you.
And that takes care of our program for today. My thanks to the mediums behind the scenes here at WCAX. I'm Jolie Whitney. Have a good one.